So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a technique lesson. We're going to go through a couple of these topics, right? Guitar versus body, fretting hand, pick holding, strumming, finger picking. And I kind of want this to be just like a little check-in. Like, how are you doing with this stuff? Are you stuck? Do you need some help? We also might use the camera guitar. We might even end up going to a guitar church at some point, but let's see. So first off, in this technique check-in, I think what I want to start with here is the most basic, most important thing, and that is, regardless of what guitar you have, holding it is the single most important thing. So step one I want you to think about here is, and I'll get a better angle so I can show you everything. So step one here is, if you are sitting in a chair that is angling your leg down, that's just going to be difficult, period. Some people don't realize it, and they sort of, I'm going to scoot even farther away, they lift their foot up while they're playing, and at a certain point halfway through a song, their leg starts shaking because they subconsciously have been holding their foot up. So if you are sitting in a chair and playing guitar, make sure that that chair is low, or that you can put your foot up on something to keep the guitar secure. This is step one. If your guitar is just going to slip off your leg, nothing else that I talk about matters. So that also means if you're sitting in a higher chair, you can cross a leg, and you see how that lifts the guitar up quite a bit. So that's really helpful. Step two here is really important. So step two is, you want to make sure that you can easily strum the guitar without having to hold it up with your left hand. A lot of people don't realize you're not supposed to hold the guitar up with your left hand. You're supposed to be able to strum freely and pick without your left hand having to do any structural work whatsoever. The other thing people kind of think about is, you kind of assume that the guitar needs to be sort of like parallel with your body, when in reality, whatever is most comfortable for you to let it sit in your lap should be the best. You want to think about how your bicep kind of pushes the guitar down into your leg and doesn't necessarily pull it toward your body. If you're trying to pull the guitar toward your body, it means it's not secure on your leg. So these things are the foundation of all guitar technique. If you don't have this stuff, none of it matters. Along the same lines, I think I want to move actually into fretting hand first, because I want to talk even more about how posture is the single most important thing. I also want to say that this is live, so if you've got a question, throw a question in the chat, and if it's relevant to what we're talking about, I'll get there. Also, I just did that pre-show for an hour, so it's getting hot in here despite running my air conditioner for 17 minutes, so you may see me get a little flushed. I'm fine, not a medical emergency, it's just probably getting close to 90 degrees in here. So, left hand technique. What's the deal? So here's something I want to show you. A lot of people have this issue with their left hand where they get to a situation where they go, I can't stretch, I don't know how people stretch their fingers. My pinky can't reach anything. I don't understand how people are able to stretch. And here's the secret. You can see the problem with my technique right here. It's because I'm relying on what I like to call my knuckle belly, right? Here's your knuckle. There you go. Here's your knuckle. Here's the belly of your knuckle, right? If you're getting your knuckle belly squished up on the back of the guitar, well, of course you're not going to be able to reach anything. The thing you want on the back of the guitar 99% of the time is your thumb. Right? So the secret to good technique and being able to stretch is, let me rearrange here. Bam. Don't get too dizzy, I'm sorry. But the secret to having good technique is this little air pocket right here. You want the back of the neck to look like this. You don't want it to look like this when you're playing single notes. That's the most important thing right there. The second most important thing, I can zoom out a little bit here, is my wrist is nice and straight. Or at least mostly straight. the more your wrist ends up like this, the more you're going to hurt yourself. You want to have the straightest wrist you possibly can most of the time. Of course, there's going to be bar chords where it's got to cramp a little bit. It's not going to be perfect, but the ideal is to have a relatively straight wrist. And along those same lines, a lot of people think that when you're playing single notes, that you want your fingers to be way out here. When in reality, when you're playing single notes, not only is it okay, but it might actually be good to be touching other strings. So thinking of especially my first finger, I'm actually not playing on the tip of that finger. I'm playing pretty flat. And what I like to think about here is, if we go back to the thumb side, when I'm playing these high strings, sometimes my thumb is going to move around. Right? It's okay for your thumb to move around to accommodate that comfy wrist. And I like to think of it as, when you're playing notes that are on the tiny strings, you might pull your wrist back a little bit, and when you're playing notes that are on these big strings up here, you're going to probably you're going to feed your fingers forward kind of like this. And if you start out like this, it's going to be pretty awkward. So thinking of like feeding just whatever amount of finger you need. See how my fingers aren't going like this? They're way back here. And then I'm feeding however much I need out, but I'm never ending up like this. And I can't stress this enough. When you're playing chords, I know this is a weird angle, but I'm trying to show you how curled my fingers are. When you're playing chords, you want to play it really on your fingertips because you don't want to touch other strings. But when you're playing single notes, it's totally okay to play more on the pad of your finger. I know this is the wrong hand, but what I'm saying is, playing chords, you're aiming for this part of your finger. Playing single notes, you might be aiming a little farther down onto the pad of your finger. And here's a really cool thing. When you play on the pad, especially the pad of your index finger, I'll demonstrate a little better. If your index finger is curled, your other fingers, it's hard for them to spread apart from that finger. But if your index finger is a little flatter, it's actually a lot easier to stretch those other fingers, especially on these low strings. If your index finger is curled, all your other fingers kind of curl toward it. But if your index is flatter, that pinky can stretch a lot farther. So with your left hand, all this stuff, this is kind of like lightning round stuff, but these are all things that you can like kind of double check with your technique and make sure things are working well. And I can't stress enough that if the guitar, we talked about holding the guitar secure, but another problem here is if the neck of the guitar is too low, these techniques aren't going to be possible, because in order for your fingers to be able to stretch, your arm has to be so far down that you're going to get that wrist angle that we're trying to avoid. So the idea is, this is exaggerated, but having the neck higher up makes all of this left hand, fretting hand technique stuff so much easier. So, this is why classical guitar players have that neck so high up, is so that they can effortlessly play those bar chords and those fancy things. And the lower the neck is down here, the harder it's going to be to play that kind of stuff. So if you're struggling with that gap that I was talking about, right? This gap right here, it might mean that your guitar is just too low and that your thumb is trying to hang over the top. Now, I will say, there are some people whose whole technique is based on the thumb muting those low strings. That's a different style of guitar. I don't play that kind of guitar. But that is a valid method of guitar. This is just my thing. This is just what I know. So that's kind of mostly my like lightning round for left hand stuff. Let's talk a bit about right hand stuff, holding a pick and strumming. So a lot of people, when they think about holding a pick, Let me find a nice little spot here to zoom in on my hands. That should just about do it. So, a lot of people, when they think about holding a pick, they think about doing this like point-to-point thing, where you've got your thumb here, your index here, and then you go and you play like this. The problem with doing something like this is it usually ends up that the pick is pointing off your index finger. And that might make some sense. Also, I got to take some of the red out of that camera. My hands look great in real life. They look very red on that camera. The problem with the pick pointing straight off your index finger like this is that when you go to strum, you end up contorting your hand to fit the angle of the pick. So I have this kind of gooseneck thing going on. And that is a problem because you need your wrist to be able to be flexible and comfortable, and you, generally speaking, you want your wrist to be pretty straight like your other hand. You want it to be relaxed. You don't want to be bending it at any weird angles, left, right, or sort of up and down like that. So holding the pick like this is going to be very limiting for you. On top of that, when you hold the pick point to point like this, there's two things that happen. When you hold it point to point, it's really easy for it to spin because it only has those two contact points. The other thing here is that it's going to make it easier to just slip out of your hand this way as well, or even this way. So holding the pick like this, not a good idea for those reasons. What I recommend instead is to think about having the pick come off your thumb at kind of a 90-degree angle, like a little, you could think of it as like a little axe head or like a little tomahawk kind of thing here. And then basically have it rest on the side of your index finger. And something like this. So here's what the other side looks like. And the reason you want to do this is the pick, you can kind of see the pick is kind of getting stuck on some skin of the side of my finger here. So I can't really, I mean, I can a little bit, but it can't really push into my hand much more, which means I don't have to hold on to really tight to keep it from pushing into my hand, which is cool. And now, if you check this out, also let me know if this is making sense or if you have any questions. This is currently live. Obviously, it won't be later. But holding the pick like this lets you can kind of see my wrist is much straighter. My hand is a lot more relaxed. There's kind of, it's almost like there's more muscles at work here and there's more natural muscles at work compared to pinching like this, where it just feels like there's some really tense, smaller, weirder muscles at work, where this is just a little more secure. And so that lets you have a straighter wrist. Right. The other thing here that I want to show you that's kind of cool and kind of weird is there's a physics thing. Maybe someone who knows physics can explain this to me, but if I find sort of the balancing point of the pick, right? Right about there. If I am letting more pick sort of be out front of that balancing point, what's going to happen when I strum the strings is it's going to actually pull the pick out of my hand. And so if you are thinking of a pick as a thing that hits the strings mainly, that you're just trying to hold a little bit of it, you are the pick's going to fall out of your hands a lot. Instead, what you want to think of is the pick is a handle, and there's just a tiny bit of it that sticks out to hit the strings. It's mostly a handle. And when you think about this physics-wise, when you're in front of that balancing point, like you're holding more pick in your hand on or in front of that balancing point, so there's just a little bit sticking out, it's never going to pull the pick out of your hand. If anything, it might push it into your hand a little bit. So that, to me, is much more secure. On top of that, it's less likely to spin because you kind of have a weird contact point here and a weird contact point here. So it's like you're going from 2 contact points like this to 3 contact points like this. Man, I think maybe super chats today are going to be for some lotion for my hands. But this, to me, is pick holding territory. From here, what we can think about is how do we actually interface with the strings with the pick? And I want to show you basically the guitar from the front first, and then we'll move into some other territory here. So when you're strumming or picking notes, there's two things you can think about. One is you can ball up your hand, which is great, or you can fling your fingers out. Both things are totally acceptable, totally cool to do. If you're holding it like this, there's a lot more weight to it. It's all kind of like, it feels like a mace or something, like a ball on a chain, and it can give you some momentum, but it can also feel a little out of control. Flinging your fingers out like here kind of spreads that mass out. And you know, it can be a little easier to pick that way. If you're picking single notes, planting some fingers kind of like the thumb on the back of the neck I was talking about earlier. It's not about planting them there and keeping them there. It's about having almost like a little bit of a shock absorber space here, where if they're just kind of floating around. But if you pick a note pretty hard, you can plant for a second. So that's kind of a picking idea. There are also some flat pickers who prefer to keep their fingers bunched up and then rest on the sort of bridge of the guitar back here and use that as an anchor point. But for them too, they're not sticking on one point and refusing to move from there. They're using it as a soft anchor point where they can kind of move around. Does that kind of make sense? Let me know if that's starting to make sense. If not, well, I'd love to clarify more. So I'm going to raise my chair up so you can see me, but I'd prefer not to. So when it comes to strumming, there's a couple things to think about. You've got this big muscle that is basically mostly responsible for strumming. If you're strumming like this, you're going to tire yourself out really fast because those are little muscles that are doing a big job. This is big muscles doing a little job, right? So you want most of your strumming to come from your forearm, like your elbow, right? And strumming patterns tend to be based on a constant down, up, down, up, down, up. So any strumming pattern that you play, most of the time, if you were to just hit the mute button, that strumming pattern would look like this, which is just down, up, 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 down, up. Okay, right? So you might wonder, okay, what is this motion and what is this motion, right? What you can think of is this is your main motion, and the softer you play, you want almost to think of this motion and this motion, right? The twisting like this. You want to think of that more as like your shock absorber and not something that you're actively doing as you're strumming. I don't want to strum like this. Right, that's really active with my muscles. You want strumming to feel kind of like, almost like jogging, where jogging is like controlled falling. You're putting your weight out in front of you and your foot's just catching you, catch, 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 catch. With strumming, you want to think about like, my muscles are flicking up, flicking down. They're not tense the whole time. I'm not actively pushing my muscles through these strums, It's actually surprisingly little muscle movement. And I'm feeling relaxed enough that these motions are sort of, it's almost like I'm whipping my wrist in response. Now, one thing to check out, and I'm gonna move into some more specific troubleshooting things, but if anyone in the chat has any issues with technique specifically that you want help with, let me know. But I'm gonna do this angle for a second because I want to show you something specific here. Let me set that up nicely. That should do. Okay, something you want to think about is, and I'm gonna angle that up just a little more. Straight wrist here gives you a lot of security, a lot of predictability. As soon as your wrist starts going like this, suddenly you have less control and you're more likely to accidentally dig into a string. Keeping a straight wrist right, a straighter wrist to start with is really helpful. There are situations where you might angle your wrist in a little bit for like but generally speaking, if you're feeling a little out of control when you're strumming, it might be because you're trying to strum with your wrist mostly and you want to focus on strumming with your arm mostly. So, from here, I want to talk about what happens if you play a chord and it sounds like this. Let's see, I can't. How do I make it sound? When you get kind of that buzz in there. What's the deal with that noise? Well, let's talk about it. And I'm going to show you a little test you can do at home over at the camera guitar. I'm going to remove all this distracting stuff here, and I'm going to zoom in. It's a little blurry in there. Maybe I will not zoom in today. Let's just go here. Okay, so what I want you to think about is when you play a note, what is, how do I put this? So when you play a chord, let's say, and you start hearing that buzzing sound, what's the deal with that? A lot of times when people play a chord, they think, oh, I'm getting some buzzing, I should probably push harder. But the reality is placement over pressure. And this is my mantra. I'll show you what I'm talking about. If you play any note on the guitar and put your finger kind of in the middle of the fret, never mind where that little G note is, put your finger in the middle of the fret, and then you just kind of relax your finger until you get some buzzing, and then you add just as much pressure as you need to get that to ring out really cleanly. Then what I want you to do is move it back toward the headstock and do the same test and see, oh, when my finger's closer to the headstock, I have to push a lot harder to get that clean sound. And if you do the opposite, if you scoot right up close to the fret here, that's part of the reason why I put the dots right there as a little reminder. That's usually where your finger should be. Then you do the same test where you just relax your finger until it starts buzzing, and then you add just enough pressure to make it sound good. You're gonna realize that right here, you need almost no pressure compared to here, and compared to here, you need a lot of pressure. So when you play a chord and you go, oh man, one of those is buzzing, maybe two of them are buzzing, what do I do? Your instinct might be to push harder, but actually think about your finger placement and see if you can scoot those fingers up close to the fret. And that's gonna give you a much cleaner, clearer sound, right? And there are some chords where you're not going to be able to get up close, like this A chord. That E is way back there, so you might have to push harder with that finger, right? But generally speaking, If your C chord isn't ringing, it might mean that your third finger isn't getting up close enough here, right? The heat's messing with my tuning. That's better. Okay. So, placement over pressure means if you hear a buzz, scoot up close to the fret. And you're going to get a cleaner sound from that. The other thing along the same lines that I want you to think about is the on-off switch. A lot of times when you start hearing a buzz like that kind of noise, that is from varying the amount of pressure that you're using, or having enough pressure initially and then kind of relaxing a little bit. And that sound is essentially the string rattling against this particular fret. So the closer you are to that fret, the less likely you are to have that noise. But like I said, it's hard to always be perfectly close to that fret. And this is the idea of on-off switch. If you're strumming a chord, have equal pressure the whole time, practice having equal pressure. And then when you're done with that chord, your fingers go dead, right? So it's like on, off. And it's much more noticeable with a bar chord, right? Pressure, no pressure, gone, off, right? That's the idea. So, with that in mind, these are some sort of basic technique issues that tend to come up for people. But does anyone have any questions specifically about what we're talking about here? Karma says, the problem is not really holding the pick, but to avoid it to be stuck while picking when alternate picking, for example. Yeah, and I think the less pick you have sticking out, the less likely it's going to be to get stuck. What's the next question, right? True S Armor says, I love all of that. That is great. I could talk a little bit more about fingerpicking as well. And I think I might. But I'll leave this up in case anyone has any questions for me. So, with fingerpicking, one of the common, oops, I zoomed way too far in. One of the common issues with fingerpicking is, I'll show you here. Oh, okay. So, thing one to think about here is, you want your thumb to always be picking out of your hand. Maybe even thinking of it as like, oh, I'm picking against my index finger. Sometimes people will scoot their fingers like this to have a clear line of sight to see each finger. And what ends up happening is you can't actually have the optimal picking situation here anymore. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. But imagine setting up your fingers on the strings they're supposed to go on, and then imagine sort of tightening a jar just a little bit. Little tightening. And the reason I'm saying this is because there are so many people who have learned to fingerpick like this. And sometimes they'll even plant a couple fingers down here. But if you look at this sort of straight, how do I look at this straight on? When you do this with your hands, what ends up happening is you've got this finger that's too straight to pick, and then you've got this finger that's maybe curled at an okay angle, and then you've got this one here that's just crammed in there. What the Mayo jar tightening thing does is it makes it so each finger has sort of the same amount of curl and can pick the string up into your hand. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I gotta readjust this a little bit. Let's see. So, we'll zoom in here. Hope I'm not making anyone too dizzy. This is live, but there we go. So, if you look at the bad technique here, we've got this finger is sort of picking the string almost at a weird enough angle that it's gonna sound bad. This one's kind of also picking at a weird angle. This one picking at a weird angle. If you do the Mayo jar tightening, all of a sudden, all your fingers are lining up, and they have the same amount of curl. This one's curled, this one's curled, this one's curled. And now, the other cool thing about this is instead of sort of picking up toward your face, your fingers are kind of picking toward the base of your thumb. And I'll show you what that looks like from the front again, right? The other cool thing about this is when you're picking, how do I put this? When you're picking that bad way, you have nothing to catch the recoil of your finger. But when you're picking the way I just showed you, the force of your finger is going toward the mass of your arm, which means you can pick pretty hard, and you're not gonna flick your hand out into the wild if you're doing this versus if you're doing what we just talked about. The other thing I like to think about is these three fingers tend to work together one string at a time. So if I grab 3 strings in a row here, and no, I don't use my pinky. I grew up playing classical, and I've never learned how to use my pinky. Some people probably do, but it tends to be too short to really get the same curl as my other fingers, so it just stays out of the way. But what you want to think about here is that these 3 fingers are controlled by your whole arm, and so you basically move these 3 fingers with your arm to the set of 3 strings that you want to play, and then from there your thumb can reach other strings. And this is kind of the idea. Right? Right. The idea here is really thinking about these 3 fingers pick a set of strings, and then your thumb can freely move among the leftover strings. So I think we're going to call it. I think we're going to call it a day if I don't get any other questions. And plus, it's hot as hell in here, and so yeah, maybe I'm going to just let's see. I'm getting a lot of great questions here. What is this one? How can I find phrases easier when playing pentatonic scales? All right, we're going to do the after show with the air conditioning running. I'm going to look at some questions here with the AC on. So Werfel says, I find my ring finger doesn't have a lot of dexterity and gets stuck on the string. How do you avoid that? Ooh, Werfel, I'm so glad you brought this up. This is a great question, and it is more related to what we're talking about. So, yeah, is the AC super noticeable out there, or is it not too bad? I'm just going to leave it on because it's hot in here. You can't hear the AC at all? Dang, I'm just going to leave it on then. So, here's something I want you to think about for those of you who find that your finger gets stuck, okay? Check this out. So, a lot of times when a finger gets stuck, especially the ring finger, it often gets stuck because this joint gets locked. So you might find you're playing a chord or you're playing a set of notes and your finger ends up like this. Anytime your finger ends up like this, that is a bad sign because that means you have to release the pressure and then unbuckle. Essentially, it's like your knuckle kind of caved in. Oh, you meant on the picking hand. Well, this is still a helpful thing to think about. So we'll do picking hand in a minute. But let's see. So essentially, when you're working on scales and soloing and finger picking and stuff, your fingers are the strongest when they're the most curled, like this, right? And let me set up this angle real quick here. Your fingers are the strongest. Oh, that, you're really gonna hear that AC. Hang on, I'll turn it off for a sec. Okay, so your fingers are the strongest when they're the most curled, like this. And they're the weakest when they're the least curled, like this. And what can happen with your fretting hand, right, is that when you reach for these low notes, one of your fingers might collapse like this. And then that's going to slow you down because you have to release enough pressure to unbuckle it. Right? So one thing you can practice if you end up having a little buckling finger like this where it just keeps collapsing and it won't behave, is you can practice doing a little exercise where you have your most curled fingers here, and then as you move up, you go, okay, they're less curled here, they're starting to buckle here, so I'm going to avoid this string, and I'm going to practice doing a little spider exercise just on those three. And this kind of like, people call it the spider walk or something, right? And I'll turn this back on. But that spider walk exercise is really great for practicing avoiding your fingers buckling by just saying like, okay, on this string they're buckling, on this string they're not, so I'm gonna work this exercise really keeping in mind making sure my fingers stay curled, and as they get stronger and stronger, you'll find, here's probably a better visual way to think about it. Your finger is the strongest when it's curled like this, and as it stretches out like this, it gets weaker, and you might notice that your joints like this, I've been playing a long time, so my finger's still pretty strong at this angle, but my other fingers are not as strong at that angle. And you might find that as your finger gets flatter, this joint might want to pop in like this, or this joint might collapse like this. And those kinds of exercises where you're finding that spot where your finger's flatter than usual, but still strong, and kind of practicing around that area, so that if you find that that finger keeps collapsing, do some exercises that get really close to that collapse point without letting it collapse, and you'll get stronger and stronger, and you'll be able to hold a lot more force with your finger a lot more curled without it doing that kind of thing, right? That's what those, yeah, the fail spot, exactly. So, Wurfel actually meant the other hand. Let me see. I find my ring finger doesn't have a lot of dexterity and gets stuck on the string. Honestly, Wurfel, I think it might be the kind of stuff we were just talking about. And by that I mean, if you're, I'll have to turn the chat off for a sec, but if you're angling your hand like this, right? Angling it up like this, your third finger is just gonna get stuck in there. So you wanna make sure that when you do that jar tightening motion, you're also thinking of having each finger evenly stuck to the strings. So let's see here. Let me zoom in one more, right? So if each finger is evenly curled, you're not gonna have as much of an issue as if you have your hand at an angle like this. That third finger is gonna feel really awkward. So just make sure you're adjusting your angle this way so that each finger is evenly curled. Does that kind of make sense? Wow, that really zooms in, I forgot. Okay, so let's get some more chats here. Yeah, Karma asks if I've ever covered hybrid picking in any of my videos. I mean, it's come up on my office hours live streams on Patreon. I haven't done a video about it here, but it's basically the same kind of thing where your pick becomes sort of your thumb, and your other fingers, you just have one less finger. So it's the same kind of thing. And so it's essentially the same technique, right? It's just that instead of picking with the side of your thumb, you're picking with the pick and your index finger is supporting it. Same concept. Cool. I feel like yeah, I feel like we could probably call it a day pretty soon here. Let's see. Oh no, we got another good question here. What can I do to stop the noise of the pick sliding through the strings when I angle it? If you mean that the pick is at a 45 rather than right on. Some of that, first of all, I would have to see exactly what you're doing to know what you're talking about. Oh, it's a muffled sound. I'm not really sure. I'd have to see what you were doing, unfortunately. That's a tricky one. But, yeah, it could be that you need to pick faster and you're kind of picking slowly. But I'm not sure. I think that I may have to call it a day. I've been going for almost 2 hours, which is pretty great, but I gotta call it a day. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. If you like what I'm doing here, check out my school. I'm gonna play a little ad for it as I'm leaving, and hope y'all have a great day, and I'll go live soon. In the meantime, you can find me at my online school. Peace out, y'all. Thanks for checking out my channel. If you like what I do here, you might really like my online school. I know a lot of YouTubers out here are trying to just get rich quick by selling you some bullshit, and I want you to know that's not me. I've spent the past 5 years building this school into something I'm really proud of. It's not for everyone, but if you're interested in how music theory works, how it maps out on the fingerboard, and how to use that knowledge to actually make your own music and play with other people, my school is probably the right place for you. So here's the deal. For only $11.67 a month, you get access to a ton of helpful resources for learning this kind of stuff. There's also a 7-day free trial if you want to try it out first. So yeah, like I said, I focus a lot on how to actually apply music theory for those who want to jam with other people or write music or develop your ear. For starters, you might like my Music Theory for Guitar series, where I start with the building blocks of music theory: scales, intervals, triads. Then build on those concepts to arrive at the chords in a key and what it actually means to be in a key. These are crucial concepts to understand if you want to be able to do that kind of stuff. You know, play with other people, jam, write music. I also have a course called Caged Basics, where I break down all 5 caged chord shapes and dig deeper into how to use them. Then we take those shapes and overlay the pentatonic scales so you can really see the relationship between the chord shapes and the pentatonic shapes. Each lesson in the series has practice tracks to make it fun and easy to get through the lessons and to really solidify the concepts. I've got a bunch more series and one-off lessons you might like, but I also want to tell you about my weekly community challenge and weekly live Q&A. The community challenge is basically a writing exercise for my patrons to practice actually using music theory concepts. It's not about writing a whole perfect song or singing or a performance of some sort. The idea is to just take a concept like write something in the key of C major, or write something spooky, or write something in 3/4 time, and just write something. Then share what you've written with the community. It's always so fun to see what people come up with. I firmly believe that writing music is not an innate gift that some special people have. It's something anyone can practice and develop over time, and I'm trying to make it a fun, communal thing. I also want to tell you about my live Q&A sessions. Every week I welcome any and all questions related to guitar, playing with other people, music theory, recording, music equipment, and whatever else comes up. Sometimes the simplest question can result in a beautiful light bulb moment that just invigorates you and makes you so excited to keep playing and keep learning, and that's why I do it. I just want you to learn, and I'm so excited when people have those moments. Anyhow, if you're interested in developing your knowledge, skill, and creativity with guitar, consider joining my online community of guitar learners at patreon.com/ScottPaulJohnson. Don't forget there's a 7-day free trial in case you want to try it out first. I hope to see you over there. Thanks for watching.